The snow fell heavy that Tuesday night, covering the city streets like a thick white blanket. Most people hurried past with their heads down, rushing to get home or into warm buildings. But one man walked slowly down the main street, his old brown coat hanging loose around his thin body. He stopped outside Romano's restaurant, one of the nicest places in town. Through the big glass windows he could see families eating dinner, couples sharing wine and waiters carrying plates of hot food. The warm yellow light spilled out onto the cold sidewalk where he stood. The man looked down at his worn shoes, then back at the restaurant. His stomach made a soft growling sound. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten a real meal. The shelter had run out of food again, and he had been walking the streets for 3 days now. He took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass door. A small bell chimed as he entered, and suddenly he felt all eyes on him. The warm air hit his face, and he could smell fresh bread and cooking meat. His mouth watered. A young woman in a black dress walked up to him quickly. She had a name tag that said host and a worried look on her face. Behind her, he could see other workers whispering and pointing in his direction. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a quiet voice. "Can I help you with something?" The man looked around the restaurant. About 30 people sat at tables covered with white cloth. Soft music played in the background, and everyone looked warm and happy. He felt very out of place in his dirty coat and old jeans. "I need to speak with the manager, please," he said. His voice was rough from not using it much lately. The young woman looked nervous. "Is there a problem, sir?" "No problem," he said. "I just need to ask something important." She nodded and walked toward the back of the restaurant. The man stood near the door, trying not to look at all the food on the tables around him. A little girl at a nearby table stared at him with big, curious eyes, until her mother gently turned her chair away. A few minutes later, the young woman came back with an older lady, who wore a nice blue shirt and had kind eyes. The manager walked up to him with a careful smile. "Hello, I'm Linda, the manager here. How can I help you tonight?" The man cleared his throat. This was the hard part. He had practiced what to say, but now the words felt stuck. "Ma'am, I know this might sound strange, but I have a request." He pointed toward the corner of the restaurant where a beautiful black piano sat. "I can play that piano really well. And I was wondering if you might let me play for your customers tonight." Linda looked confused. "Well, we don't usually have live music on Tuesday nights, in exchange for a meal," he added quickly. "Just one plate of food. Anything you have. I can play for an hour, maybe more. Whatever you think is fair." The restaurant had gotten quieter. People at nearby tables were listening to their conversation, even though they pretended to look at their phones or talk to each other. Linda studied his face. She noticed his hands. They were clean and his fingernails were short and neat. Something about the way he looked at the piano made her pause. "Sir, can I ask, do you really know how to play?" He nodded. "I've been playing since I was 6 years old. I'm good at it. I promise I won't embarrass your restaurant." Linda looked around at her customers, then back at him. The restaurant had rules about this kind of thing. They couldn't just let anyone walk in off the street. But something in his voice made her believe him. "What kind of music do you play?" she asked. "Classical mostly, some jazz, a few popular songs that people know." He paused. "Music that makes people feel good while they eat." A man at table 12 was watching them closely. He leaned over to his wife and whispered something. She looked up from her salad and nodded. Linda made a decision that surprised even herself. "Okay, but just for 15 minutes. If it doesn't work out, you'll need to leave quietly. Deal?" The man's face lit up with the first real smile anyone in that restaurant had seen from him. "Deal, thank you so much." Linda walked him over to the piano. It was a beautiful instrument that the restaurant's owner had bought years ago but rarely used. She lifted the lid and the black and white keys gleamed under the soft lights. "What's your name?" Linda asked as he sat down on the small bench. "David," he said, running his fingers gently over the keys without pressing them down. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Linda nodded and stepped back. The restaurant was watching now. Conversations had stopped and even the waiters were looking over from behind the bar. David closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and placed his hands on the keys. For just a second, everything was perfectly quiet except for the soft sounds of the kitchen in the back. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, like a whisper. But within seconds, everyone in the restaurant knew they were hearing something special. The music flowed from his fingers like water, each note clear and perfect. A woman near the window stopped eating her soup. A businessman put down his phone. Even the little girl who had stared at him earlier was now listening with her mouth open. David played a piece that most people didn't recognize, but it didn't matter. The music told a story without words. It spoke of lonely nights and cold streets, but also of hope and beauty that could still exist in the world. Linda stood behind the bar, watching this homeless man transform her restaurant with just his hands and an old piano. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her life. The 15 minutes she had promised felt like both forever and no time at all. When David finished the first song, there was complete silence for about 3 seconds. Then someone started clapping, and soon the whole restaurant was applauding. David looked up, surprised. He had forgotten where he was for a moment. Playing the piano always took him to another place, a place where nothing hurt and everything made sense. He started another song, this one a little more upbeat. People began to smile and nod their heads. A couple at table 8 started holding hands across their table. Linda knew she was watching something she would remember for the rest of her life. This wasn't just a homeless man playing for food. This was an artist sharing his gift with the world, but she had no idea that in just a few more minutes everything would change. Someone in the restaurant was about to recognize David, and the truth about who he really was would shock everyone in that warm, music-filled room. David's fingers moved across the piano keys like they belonged there. Each note rang out clear and perfect, filling every corner of Romano's restaurant. The second song he played was different from the first. It had more energy, more life. People couldn't help but tap their feet under the tables. At table 15, an older gentleman put down his fork and just listened. His wife reached across and squeezed his hand. They had been married for 40 years, but somehow this music made them feel young again. The waiters had stopped moving around so much. Tony, who had been working at Romano's for 8 years, stood by the kitchen door with a tray in his hands, completely forgetting about the food getting cold. He had never heard anything like this. Linda, the manager, watched from behind the bar. She kept checking her watch, but not because she wanted David to stop. The 15 minutes she had promised were almost up, but she couldn't bring herself to interrupt. The whole restaurant had changed. People were smiling more, talking softer, looking at each other instead of their phones. David moved into his third song without stopping. This one was slower, more thoughtful. His eyes were closed, and it looked like he was somewhere far away from the restaurant. His hands knew exactly where to go, like the piano was an old friend he was having a conversation with. A young couple at table 3 had been arguing when David started playing. Something about money and bills and stress from work, but now they sat quietly, holding hands across the small table. The music seemed to remind them why they fell in love in the first place. Near the window, a businesswoman who always ate dinner alone was crying softly. She wiped her eyes with her napkin, but she couldn't stop the tears. The music was bringing up memories she had buried deep. Her father teaching her to play piano when she was little. Before life got so complicated and busy, David opened his eyes and looked around the restaurant for the first time since he started playing. What he saw surprised him. Everyone was watching, but not in a bad way. They looked peaceful, happy even. Some people had tears in their eyes, but they were good tears. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to share music with people. For so long, he had only played for himself, late at night in empty places where no one could hear. But this was what music was supposed to be. Something shared, something that brought people together. A little boy at table 7 was standing on his chair trying to see better. His parents usually would have told him to sit down, but tonight they let him watch. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder as he watched David's hands dance across the keys. "Mommy," the boy whispered. "How does he make it sound so pretty?" His mother smiled and pulled him closer. "I don't know, honey. Some people are just born with magic in their fingers." David started another song, this one familiar to more people. It was an old song that everyone's grandparents knew, but he played it in a way that made it sound fresh and new. A few people began humming along quietly. The kitchen staff had started gathering near the door to listen. Carlos, the head chef, had been cooking for 20 years, but he had never seen his dining room like this. Usually people ate quickly and left. Tonight, nobody seemed to want to go anywhere. Linda looked at her watch again. David had been playing for almost 30 minutes now, double what she had promised. But she couldn't stop him. The restaurant was making more money tonight than they had in weeks. Not because people were ordering more food, but because they were staying longer, ordering more drinks, bringing friends over to other tables to listen. At table 12, an elderly woman was clutching her husband's arm. She kept staring at David with a strange look on her face. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. The way he held his shoulders when he played, the way his head tilted slightly to the left when he hit the deeper notes. "Robert," she whispered to her husband, "doesn't he remind you of someone?" Her husband adjusted his glasses and looked more carefully. "What do you mean, dear?" "I don't know. Something about him." She shook her head. "Maybe I'm just imagining things." David moved into what he decided would be his last song. He had been playing for almost 40 minutes, and he could see that Linda was getting nervous about the time. This song was special to him, something he had written years ago during a very different time in his life. The melody started soft and sad, like rain on a window. But slowly it grew stronger and more hopeful. It told a story of someone who had lost everything but found a way to keep going. The music spoke of dark nights and bright mornings, of falling down and getting back up. As he played, David thought about all the things that had brought him to this moment. The cold nights sleeping under bridges, the days when he thought about giving up completely, the times when only music kept him alive, but also the small kindnesses from strangers, the beauty he still found in simple things, the hope that somehow, someday things might get better. The restaurant was completely silent except for the piano. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. It felt like the whole world was listening to this one man and his music. A teenager at table 9 was recording with her phone. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her life, and she wanted to share it with her friends. But as she listened, she forgot about the phone and just let the music wash over her. The elderly woman at table 12 was getting more agitated. She kept whispering to her husband, pointing at David, shaking her head like she was trying to remember something important. "I know him," she finally said, loud enough for people at nearby tables to hear. I know him from somewhere." Her husband tried to calm her down. "Helen, you're probably just confused. He's just a homeless man who plays piano." But Helen wasn't listening. She was staring at David's hands, at the way he moved, at something about his face that was nagging at her memory. She had seen him before, she was sure of it. But where and when? David played the final notes of his song, letting them hang in the air like a question waiting for an answer. The silence that followed was deep and complete. For a moment nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then the applause started. Not polite restaurant clapping, but real applause. People stood up, whistling and cheering like they were at a concert hall instead of a neighborhood restaurant. David looked up, surprised and overwhelmed. His eyes were wet with tears he hadn't realized were falling. It had been so long since anyone had clapped for his music. But as he looked around the room, he noticed the elderly woman at table 12 staring at him with wide eyes. She was standing now, her hand over her mouth, pointing at him with a shaking finger. And David felt his heart stop, because now he recognized her too. The truth was about to come out, and everything was about to change. Helen's hand trembled as she pointed at David. The whole restaurant was still clapping, but she couldn't hear the applause anymore. All she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "It's him," she whispered to her husband Robert. "Oh my God, it's really him." Robert looked confused. "Helen, what are you talking about?" "Who is he?" But Helen wasn't listening. She was walking toward the piano, moving slowly like she was in a dream. Other people in the restaurant noticed her strange behavior and started watching. The applause began to die down as everyone wondered what was happening. David saw her coming and felt his chest tighten. He knew that walk, that determined look on her face. Even though she was older now, with gray hair and wrinkles around her eyes, he would recognize Helen Morrison anywhere. "David?" Helen called out, her voice shaking. "David Chen?" The restaurant went completely silent. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to stop. David looked down at the piano keys, wishing he could disappear. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I think you have me confused with someone else." But Helen was close enough now to see his face clearly. She studied every detail, the shape of his nose, the way his eyebrows curved, the small scar above his left eye that he had gotten as a child. "No," she said firmly. "No, I know exactly who you are." She turned to face the restaurant, her voice getting stronger. "This man is David Chen. 15 years ago, he was the principal pianist for the City Symphony Orchestra." A gasp went through the room. Several people pulled out their phones and started searching. The businessman at table 8 typed quickly, his face getting more surprised with each result that popped up. "The City Symphony?" someone called out. "Are you sure?" Helen nodded, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I was on the board of directors for 12 years. I watched him perform dozens of times. He was the most talented musician we ever had." David stood up from the piano bench, his legs feeling weak. "Helen, please, don't do this." "David Chen," Helen continued, her voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "He won the international piano competition when he was only 25. He played with orchestras in New York, London, Paris. He was going to be one of the greatest pianists of our time." The teenager who had been recording pulled up a video on her phone. It was grainy and old, but it showed a much younger David on stage, wearing a black tuxedo, playing piano with a full orchestra behind him. The audience in the video was giving him a standing ovation. "That's him," she said, showing her phone to the people at nearby tables. "That's really him." Linda, the manager, walked over slowly. She looked at David, then at the video, then back at David. "Is this true? Were you really in the symphony?" David's shoulders sagged. The secret he had kept for 15 years was out. There was no point in lying anymore. "Yes," he said quietly. "A long time ago." The restaurant erupted in whispers and gasps. People were showing each other videos and articles on their phones. The businessman found a news story from 15 years ago with David's picture and started reading it out loud. David Chen, principal pianist for the City Symphony Orchestra, announced today that he will be taking an indefinite leave of absence following the tragic accident that claimed the lives of his wife and young daughter last month. The room went silent again. Helen covered her mouth with her hand, remembering now why David had disappeared. "The accident," she whispered. "Oh, David, I'm so sorry. We all wondered what happened to you. You just vanished." David sat back down on the piano bench, his head in his hands. "I couldn't do it anymore. After they died, I couldn't play. I couldn't do anything. The music reminded me too much of them." A woman at table 4 was crying openly now. She had lost her own husband 2 years ago and understood the kind of pain that could make someone want to disappear completely. "But you're playing now," said the little boy who had been standing on his chair. His innocent voice cut through all the adult conversations. "You're playing beautiful music." David looked up at the child. "Sometimes music is the only thing that keeps us going, even when everything else is broken." Helen took a step closer to the piano. "David, we looked for you for years. The symphony kept your position open for 3 years, hoping you would come back." "I couldn't come back," David said. "Not to that life. Not to those concert halls where Katie used to sit in the front row with our daughter Lucy. Not to the music that we used to dance to in our kitchen." The restaurant was completely silent now, except for the sound of people crying. Everyone was thinking about their own families, their own losses, their own moments when life had knocked them down. Robert, Helen's husband, spoke up from their table. "Son, what happened to you wasn't your fault. The accident, it was just a terrible thing that happened." David shook his head. "I was supposed to be driving that night."
Katie was tired, but I had been drinking wine at the symphony fundraiser.
She said she would drive instead. "If I had just called a cab, if I had made a different choice." "You can't blame yourself for that," Helen said gently. "Katie wouldn't want you to live like this." A teenage girl at table 16 raised her hand slowly like she was in school. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something?" David nodded. "Why did you ask to play for food tonight? I mean, if you're famous, couldn't you just go back to playing concerts and make money?" David was quiet for a long moment. "When you lose everything that matters to you, money doesn't seem important anymore. I lost my house, my car, my savings. But more than that, I lost myself. For years, I couldn't even touch a piano without falling apart." "What changed?" asked the businesswoman who had been crying early. "I don't know," David said honestly. "Maybe I was just tired of being hungry. Maybe I was tired of being alone. Or maybe—" He looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching him. "Maybe I finally remembered that music isn't just for me. It's for sharing." Helen was crying harder now. "David, please, come back to us. The symphony isn't the same without you. We have a new conductor, new musicians, but we've never found anyone who could play like you." David stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was still falling, covering the streets in white. He thought about all the cold nights he had spent outside, all the times he had wanted to give up completely. I don't know if I can be that person anymore, he said. The person who played in concert halls and wore expensive suits. That David died in the car with Katie and Lucy. Then don't be that person, said the little boy's mother. Be this person, the one who played for us tonight and made everyone happy. David turned back to look at the room full of people. They were all watching him with hope in their eyes. For the first time in 15 years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there might be a way forward, but he still had no idea how much his life was about to change again. David stood by the window, watching the snow fall outside while the entire restaurant waited for him to say something. The silence felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Helen wiped her tears with a napkin and took another step toward him. David, I need to tell you something. Something that might change how you feel about everything. He turned around slowly. What do you mean? After you disappeared, the symphony board made a decision. We didn't just keep your job open for 3 years. Helen's voice was shaking. We created something called the Chen Family Memorial Fund. David's face went pale. You did what? Every year on the anniversary of the accident, we hold a special concert. All the money raised goes to help families who have lost loved ones in car accidents. We've helped over 200 families pay for funeral costs, therapy, and getting back on their feet. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. David stared at Helen like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. We've raised almost $500,000 over the years, Helen continued, all in Katie and Lucy's memory. All because of the music you gave us before you left. David sat down hard in a chair near the window. His hands were shaking. I had no idea. A man at table 5 cleared his throat. He was middle-aged with kind eyes and work clothes. Mr. Chen? My name is Mike. 3 years ago, my wife died in a car accident. Left me with 2 little kids and bills I couldn't pay. David looked up at him. The Chen Family Memorial Fund helped pay for my wife's funeral. More than that, they paid for counseling for my kids. My daughter was having nightmares every night. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Because of your fund, she got the help she needed. Mike's voice cracked a little. She's doing great now. Plays piano herself, actually. Always says she wants to play like the man who helped her family when they needed it most. A woman at table 8 stood up. Mr. Chen, my brother died in a drunk driving accident 5 years ago. Your fund helped my parents pay for grief counseling. It saved their marriage. Then a young man near the bar spoke up. My sister was killed by a hit-and-run driver 2 years ago. The Chen Fund helped us hire a lawyer to make sure the driver went to jail. One by one, people around the restaurant started standing up. An older gentleman said the fund had helped pay for his grandson's therapy after losing his parents. A young mother said it had helped her family when her husband died, leaving her alone with 3 children. David looked around the room in shock. How is this possible? How are all of you here tonight? Helen smiled through her tears. This isn't an accident, David. When I recognized you, I sent a quick text to some people. Word spread fast. Some of these people drove across town to get here. But how did they know to come so quickly? Linda, the restaurant manager, stepped forward with her phone in her hand. The teenage girl who was recording? She posted your video online 20 minutes ago. It already has 10,000 views. David felt dizzy. Everything was happening too fast. The teenager held up her phone. Mr. Chen, people are sharing your story everywhere. Look at the comments. She started reading from her screen. This made me cry. This man is a hero. How can we help him? Where is this restaurant? Someone start a fundraiser for this pianist. Another person called out, Mr. Chen, there's already a news crew on their way here. Channel 7 wants to interview you. No, David said quickly, standing up. I can't do interviews. I can't handle all of this attention. Helen walked over and gently took his hand. David, you don't understand. You've been helping people for 15 years without even knowing it. You think you disappeared and stopped making a difference, but you've been saving lives this whole time? Robert, Helen's husband, spoke from their table. Son, my wife has been looking for you for years. Not just for the symphony, but because she wanted to tell you something important. What? David asked. Helen squeezed his hand. The night Katie and Lucy died, you weren't the only one who was supposed to be driving.
Katie called me that evening, remember?
She told me you had been drinking and she was going to drive home instead. David nodded, the memory still painful. What you don't know is that Katie also told me how proud she was of you that night. She said you had been sober for 6 months, that you were taking better care of yourself, that she had never seen you happier. She said the fundraiser that night raised more money than any event in the symphony's history because of your performance. David's eyes filled with tears. She said that? She said you were becoming the man she always knew you could be. And David? Helen paused, making sure he was really listening. She said that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted you to keep playing. She made me promise that if something happened, I would remind you that your music was a gift that was meant to be shared. The restaurant was completely silent except for the sound of people crying softly. I couldn't keep that promise for 15 years. Helen continued. Because I couldn't find you. But tonight here you are, and I can finally tell you what Katie wanted you to know. David was crying openly now. I thought I killed them. I thought it was my fault. No, honey, said the woman whose brother had died in an accident. Accidents happen. But the good we do afterward, that's what matters. That's what keeps their memory alive. Mike, the man whose wife had died, stood up again. Mr. Chen, my daughter practices piano every day because of you. She says she's going to be a pianist when she grows up so she can help people the way you helped us. And my parents, said the woman whose brother died. They volunteer at the hospital now, helping other families who've lost loved ones. They say your fund taught them how to turn their pain into something good. David looked around the room at all these people whose lives had been touched by tragedy, just like his. But instead of giving up, they had found ways to keep going, to help others, to make something beautiful out of something broken. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Helen smiled. You don't have to say anything. Just think about this. Katie and Lucy didn't die for nothing. Their memory has been helping people for 15 years, and now maybe it's time for you to help people too. Not as the old David who played in concert halls, but as the David who understands loss and knows how music can heal. The teenage girl looked up from her phone again. Mr. Chen, the video has 50,000 views now. People are asking how they can donate to the memorial fund. They want to help. Linda walked over with a plate of food. David, you earned this meal fair and square. But I think you've earned a lot more than that tonight. David looked at the warm food, then at all the faces around him. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't feel alone, but the biggest surprise was still coming. David sat down at the table Linda had prepared for him, looking at the hot plate of food she had brought. Steam rose from the mashed potatoes and roasted chicken, and his stomach reminded him how hungry he was, but he couldn't eat yet. Too much was happening too fast. The restaurant had filled up even more. Word was spreading through social media, and people were driving from all over the city just to see him. Cars were parking up and down the street outside Romano's restaurant. Mr. Chen, said a young woman who had just walked in with her family. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to come. My name is Rebecca, and I'm a music teacher at Lincoln Elementary School. David looked up from his food. 5 years ago, the Chen Memorial Fund bought instruments for our music program. Before that, we had 3 broken keyboards and no money to fix them. Now we have a full classroom of instruments, and we teach over 200 kids how to play music. She pulled out her phone and showed him a video of young children playing piano, violin, and drums in a bright classroom. These kids come from families that can't afford music lessons, but because of your fund, they're learning to play. Some of them are so talented, Mr. Chen. They're going to grow up and become musicians because of what you made possible. David watched the video, seeing the joy on the children's faces as they made music together. They look so happy, he said quietly. Music changes everything for them, Rebecca continued. We have kids who were failing in school, but once they started learning piano, their grades improved. We have shy kids who found their voice through singing. We have kids dealing with tough stuff at home, and music gives them a safe place to express their feelings. A man in a suit walked into the restaurant, followed by a woman with a camera. The news crew had arrived. David felt panic rising in his chest. I can't do this, he said to Helen. I can't be on TV talking about Katie and Lucy. Helen sat down next to him. Then don't talk about them if you're not ready. But maybe you could talk about the kids, about the families who've been helped, about what music means to you. The reporter, a friendly-looking woman in her 40s, approached their table carefully. Mr. Chen, I'm Jennifer from Channel 7 News. We don't have to do a formal interview if you're not comfortable, but people want to know your story. The video of you playing tonight has been shared over 100,000 times in the past hour. David's hands shook as he picked up his fork. 100,000? And it's still growing, said the teenager, looking at her phone. People are sharing it everywhere. Course Piano Man's story is trending. Jennifer, the reporter, sat down across from David. Sir, we've been getting calls all evening from people who want to help. There's already a GoFundMe page someone started to help you get back on your feet. It's raised $15,000 in the past 30 minutes. What? David nearly choked on his water. People want to help you, Jennifer continued. But more than that, they want to know about the Memorial Fund. Donations to the Chen Family Memorial Fund have increased by 300% just tonight. Helen was crying again, but these were happy tears. David, do you understand what this means? Your story, your music tonight. It's going to help so many more families. Linda brought over a chair for Jennifer and turned down the lights a little to make the restaurant feel more comfortable for everyone. Mr. Chen, Jennifer said gently, would you be willing to play one more song tonight? People watching online would love to hear you play again. David looked around the restaurant. It was packed now with people of all ages. Families with children, elderly couples, young people recording with their phones, all of them looking at him with hope and kindness in their eyes. What would you like me to play? He asked. Whatever feels right to you, Jennifer said. David stood up and walked back to the piano. The room fell silent again. He sat down on the bench and thought about everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning he had been a homeless man with no hope for the future. Tonight, he was surrounded by people who cared about him and wanted to help. He began to play a song he had written for Katie on their wedding day. It was the first time he had played it since she died. The melody was soft and sweet, full of love and memories that no longer hurt quite as much. As he played, he thought about Lucy dancing in their living room while he practiced. He thought about Katie making dinner while humming along to his music. For the first time in 15 years, these memories made him smile instead of cry. When he finished the song, the applause was thunderous. People were standing, cheering, wiping tears from their eyes. Jennifer stood up with her microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something truly special. David Chen, a man who lost everything but found his way back to hope through music. David stayed at the piano bench. I want to say something, he said quietly, but his voice carried across the room. Everyone listened. 15 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought losing my family meant I had nothing left to give the world. I was wrong. He paused, looking around at all the faces watching him. Tonight I learned that even when we think we've lost everything, we can still make a difference. Even when we think we're alone, there are people who care about us. He stood up from the piano. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'm ready to play in concert halls again or wear fancy suits, but I know one thing. I'm not going to waste any more years feeling sorry for myself. Helen walked over to him. David, the symphony would be honored to have you back. Not as the old principal pianist, but in whatever role feels right to you. Maybe you could start by working with young musicians, teaching them what music really means. Or, said Rebecca, the music teacher, you could come play for my students sometime. They would love to meet a real professional pianist. Mike, the man whose wife had died, raised his hand. Mr. Chen, my daughter would love to take piano lessons. Would you consider teaching private students? David felt overwhelmed, but in a good way. I don't even have a place to live. Linda stepped forward. Actually, I might have an idea about that. My brother owns an apartment building about 6 blocks from here. He's been looking for someone to be the building manager, someone responsible who could live there in exchange for work. Would you be interested? I don't know anything about managing buildings, David said. But you're good with people, Linda smiled. And after tonight, I think you could handle just about anything. David looked around the restaurant one more time. The snow was still falling outside, but it didn't look cold and threatening anymore. It looked peaceful, like a fresh start covering the whole world. Okay, he said quietly. Then louder. Okay, let's see what happens next. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Jennifer's camera captured it all. The moment when a man who had lost everything found his way back to hope, surrounded by a community that refused to let him face the future alone. As David sat down to finally eat his meal, he realized something important. He had asked to play piano for food, but he had received so much more. He had found his family again, not the one he had lost, but a new one made up of people who understood that sometimes, when we help others, we end up helping ourselves. The music had brought him home.